Okay, so first of all, thanks for being here, you guys. I mean, it's the Thursday before the week of the 4th of July. And so I'm going, I wonder how many people are already on vacation, right? So thanks for being here. And for those who don't know me, I'm Cindy Olson. I'm the founder of the Executive Strategic Alliance. And in a past life, I was the CHRO of Enron. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. As you know, as you heard, we're recording this. I have a lot of people reach out and say, hey, can't make it today. Are you recording it? So we record it. We've got a YouTube channel. I post it there, but I will send the recording and a link and the slides that Ted's going to use. So you guys have all that in one place after the session. And then please, you guys, please feel free to ask questions or comment or join in the discussion anytime by either coming off mute, I'll be monitoring the chat. You can raise your hand. I'll be monitoring that. So we really want your participation, and any questions you have, please ask them. And then, like I said, I'll send an email out after this session with the recording and the slides, so you don't have to take notes. So just a little bit about ESA. We for the past 8 years, have partnered with ADP to build this executive community of nearly 3,000 participants in 20 cities, delivering what I call world-class thought leadership. And my goal is always to bring the kind of thought leadership that you would see at the conference board. And we do have a lot of conference board presenters, and exposure to innovative technologies that are shaping the future of work. And for those of you who don't know, we do have at future of work tech startups that join us quarterly, so that you guys get a flavor of those startups. And we're unique. Our network is unique in that we bring CHROs, CIOs, CFOs. I don't know if Laura Lewis is on here, but CFOs and all work tech executives together, because we believe that they all have to work in lockstep to be able to create the kind of worker experience necessary to attract and retain talent. We also offer a board positioning membership that provides many of the resources an executive needs to navigate to their perfect board seat. And by the way, check it out on our website. These two thought leaders today deliver content in that program. These guys are amazing. So I'm excited to welcome Ted Bililies, who is the global lead of transformative leadership for Alix Partners. And he'll share insights from Alix Partners' recent 2024 PE survey. And joining him is Don Mosely, a good friend of mine for a while. And he will share his experience as a former CHRO and founder and CEO of an organization that helps PE firms grow and transform their portfolio companies. And if you are in our board positioning program, you've probably been introduced to Don Mosely, because he helps CHROs, CIOs work with PE firms. He's amazing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ted and Don, and I want them to introduce themselves more appropriately, because they have lots of experience, and I want you guys to understand how great these guys are. Okay, so Ted, it's all yours.
What an amazing introduction, Cindy. Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. And on behalf of my partner, Dawn, and all of us, it's just a real privilege to be able to get a chance to speak with you today. I hope that you will make this a real conversation. The last thing any of us wants, me first, is to listen to me speak, and I'm sure Dawn feels the same way. So we really invite your questions, your perspective. I'm seeing some familiar faces from other times I've joined this group. And a special thank you to you, Cindy, for setting all of this up. But I will just do a little bit of a less brief intro on myself and then pass it to Dawn. I've really had the pleasure and really the privilege of working with private equity investors now pushing 30 years. I didn't know it at the time, but I met a number of the founders of some of the really big private equity firms back in the 90s as they were taking off, and did a lot of work for them and their portfolio companies. And then, the private equity industry, as you all know, has, exploded over the last, 25 years to the point where, 20% of the companies in the US, for example, are private equity owned. It's a world unto itself, as many of you know. And so I've been involved, particularly with our work at Alix Partners, on helping transform many of those portfolio companies, as well as working inside the private equity investment firms themselves, helping them eat their own cooking, if you will, help them really grow. How are they identifying talent inside of their organizations? How are they getting into new businesses in efficient and effective ways? How are they creating the kind of cultures in their firms that are going to attract the investors, that are going to create, the value in growing the portfolio and portfolio companies? I really have got to say that having had this kind of 3-decade perspective on the sector, I think we're entering if not into a golden age of private equity, I think we're entering into a golden age of human capital in private equity, where I really think that that investors are really beginning to understand the value of people in their investments. So for many, many years, it was all about financial engineering, and people were almost in the way of an investment, right? You just look at the balance sheet, you figure what you're going to cut, what you're going to acquire, what you're going to divest, and that's how you made your money. And then in the last 15 years, we've been taking a more operationally sophisticated approach. And really, in the last 5, with the advent of hiring human capital partners into private equity firms, we're now understanding that people actually matter to a return. So that's the kind of the privilege that I've had, is to get to work with people involved in that process.
When did Kristen come to drop off the thing?
And so I just a reminder that everyone should go on mute. So that's kind of a little bit about me. And one more thing about Alix Partners in our survey. So almost 10 years ago, we started an annual survey of private equity investors and portfolio CEOs and CXOs, specifically, not just to look at those two groups, but to look at the relationship between those two groups. So we have our 9th annual survey to share with you today. Don and I are going to go through some of the top line findings. It's a very lengthy and in-depth report, but it'll be enough, I think, to kind of whet your appetite and get you to ask questions. So we're very proud of this survey. Next year will be our 10th year in doing this, and I think it's kind of one of a kind in the industry. I've not seen anything else like this in private equity. Don, over to you.
Thanks, Ted. Hello, everybody. I'm Don Moseley. Cindy, thank you so much for allowing me to participate today. Certainly, Ted, you did a great job in terms of recapping where private equity has been, where they are looking to go, and where they are now. I've had my whole career has been in HR. Started my career with a big public company, serial acquirer, a healthcare company that grew to 100 billion. And I grew with that company into the most senior role, which was SVP of Talent Management, Organizational Development. Did that for about 10 years. Really wanted to gain some global experience. So went on and worked for a London-based company that had the opportunity to transform its organization globally. So great experience, did that for about 5 years. And then frankly, stumbled into private equity and took a role as a CHRO for a global manufacturing company out of Providence, Rhode Island. Ares Management was the major investor, but we also were traded on the NASDAQ and fell in love with it. Very few times can I say that I've found my passion. This is what I love to do, and to watch not only the HR function grow, evolve, change, play a bigger role, but human capital, and then watching PE really gravitate toward that has been just thrilling for me. So I'm very excited to be part of it. As I said, started as a CHRO for a portfolio company, did that a couple of times, and then realized, man, I love it so much. I want to do it for as many private equity portfolio companies as I can. So in 2017, started my own company, Next Generation Human Capital, and have grown that to a global company. Happy to say we're a global firm. We service all regions of the globe, and really big and small private equity firms. And again, like Ted said, I had the good fortune when I was a CHRO to have some really fabulous operating partners and private equity firms to work with. And they were really focused on talent management and human capital and culture. And it really shaped my way of thinking. And it's allowed me to take that forward and work with other portfolio companies as they come under the wing of a private equity group. And so oftentimes, what my specialty is an investment around owner, founder, and then them becoming part of a portfolio. And what does that mean? Growing from what usually is a high single-digit EBITDA number to a double-digit EBITDA number feels like overnight. And how do we do that? And what I found, there are three things that really happen. One is focusing on leadership, focusing on talent, focusing on culture. That's the value creation part of it. And then, the other thing that, to Ted's point, what I've seen evolve over the last 5 years is this notion of sustainability. It's not about, fixing it and selling it. It really is, how do we create an organization that's going to last longer than even a liquidity event? And so that's been a lot of fun to watch as well. So with that, Ted, that's me. Again, excited to be here. Thanks, Cindy, again for inviting me, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. That's a wonderful introduction. And I love the fact you come from HR. I neglected to mention that I'm actually a clinical psychologist by training. So Ginny, it was nice to see you join. You're in IO, and I spent a lot of time in IO, though my doctorate is in clinical. So it really does. We could have another conversation about how does one bring the best of their backgrounds and what backgrounds are relevant really to where private equity is going now and what private equity needs from all of us. One thing's for sure, it's interdisciplinary, right? There isn't one path to solving this issue. It's really interdisciplinary. So if we could start with the slides, and this is not a lecture, as I've said many times, but this is a way for Dawn and I to stimulate some conversation with all of you. This, again, is our 9th annual private equity survey. Couple of facts about the survey, because you may be wondering. The N, the number of the sample size, and Erin is the one who's doing the magic behind here. She'll have the exact number, but we're about a few hundred, investors and senior managers, CEOs in this. It is primarily North America. We do have a sampling from EMEA, primarily from Europe. But this is primarily North American data, and the data was collected and analyzed and published earlier this year. Call it March the 1st of 2024. So it's still, relatively fresh and new. So let's go to the first slide. Okay, and this is where I'm going to give you just sort of the headlines. Invite Dawn to jump in, and then we'll be watching the chat if anyone wants to kind of comment or ask for clarification or disagree. Disagreement is welcome here. So as I said in my opening comments, we don't just want to look at what are on investors' minds these days and what are on the people that are running the company's minds these days, particularly in terms of talent and leadership, but we want to see where they agree and where they disagree. And then underlying that, we really want to look at what's the quality of the relationship. COVID did strain the relationship between the two groups, between sponsors and the management teams. But we found here that the PE Portco relationship is actually pretty good. If you look at the light blue and the dark blue, the light blue are PE investors and the dark blue are the folks running the companies. On things like collaboration and trust, that would be columns 1 and 3. Those ratings, certainly from the PE side, are pretty high. I think we might want to see them higher from the management team side. Dawn, I think your experience, and please speak to this.
Mhm.
Your experience was that you found the relationship pretty collaborative and cooperative most of the time. That's what the impression I'm getting from you. Clearly, with some of my clients, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing that there can be dissatisfaction. I should probably say that the overriding headline that we got out of this set of data is that it is now time to perform. With increasing interest rates, the cost of capital, we all understand how private equity works. You buy a company with borrowed money, so there's a cost of capital. Frequently, you lay some debt on that purchase, and then that management team has to outperform. Well, there are significant headwinds in that model with higher interest rates, with these stubbornly high interest rates. And so that creates a lot of stress. So the overriding headline of this year's study was, man, we have to perform. We, being the management team, and the PE investors are saying the same thing. So there's opportunity for stress between that relationship. We're seeing some of that here. Let me sort of pause and Don, anything you
Sure.
wanted to add or reflect on?
Yeah, I think spot on from what I see. I talk to a lot of the private equity firms, also to a lot of the CEOs of portfolio companies. And the only thing I might add, Ted, is that relationship really starts even before the deal is signed. It is that whole courting, if you will, and it's all around transparency on both sides. What are the expectations from the PE firm, for the portco company, but also then what are we really offering as a portco company back to the PE firm, and making sure you get calibrated and aligned even as that deal is being signed. Going into that, I think we get everybody excited and everybody knows sort of what we're striving towards right out of the gate. Because you're right, everybody has a vested interest in succeeding here. And so I have found with the private equity firms, they are willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that we can hit those numbers, whatever they may be, so that, and that may mean more capital, that may mean a different type of human capital, but whatever it is, I have found the PE firms to be very agreeable to doing whatever they need to do from a resource standpoint to make sure that asset is successful.
I think that's spot on too, and I couldn't agree with you more. One of the things that we could have a whole other seminar, Cindy, on this, but that the run up to signing the deal and then the honeymoon period, or whatever you want to call it, after the deal, there's a lot of best behavior, and there isn't a lot of real behavior in the sense that what we encourage our clients to do, particularly before the signing of the deal and then immediately after, is to have a very explicit and honest conversation about expectations. So, sponsor, how often do you expect to see the financials? Management team, how often do you expect to be called to produce the financials? These are very, very basic things that don't get talked about in the courtship process and don't get talked about in the sale process. And I'd love to say that we do this 100% of the time, but about 20% of the time, we actually take, the board and the company off-site for a day, and we actually script this. We actually talk through how the two groups, should get along to ensure that trust gets built, that not if conflicts arise, when conflicts arise, how are you going to resolve them, et cetera? Because, I've seen, and Don, I'm sure you've seen this too, that, relationships can really sour, a bad quarter or a bad couple of quarters in a row. You realize, which teams have spent time up front building the trusting relationship and which teams have not.
Yeah.
Can I jump in with the question, guys?
Sure.
Susan Conrad, she's asking the question, how have the PE firms responded to the gap between their perception versus the port code perception? And what systems or challenges contribute to the gap?
Can I just ask Don to finish his
Yep.
thought? Don,
Yep.
did you want to
Well,
respond?
yeah,
And then
I think I was just going to agree. It's like, setting those expectations right up front. Again, that honeymoon period, the thing that I have found that has evolved probably most significantly over the last 5 years is this notion of change management and really putting in the emphasis on change management, understanding the perspective and the history from the Portco company. I mean, remember that a lot of times these are owner founders. This is their baby. They grew it from nothing, from scratch. And now they're part of a larger organization, and they're not necessarily as in control as they used to be, although we still want them to be owners and feel very much that ownership. So, and again, as long as we can agree on that and we've got a cadence and we're hitting our numbers, it can be a very, very good relationship. You miss a couple of quarters, things start to change a little bit, to be honest. I always kid with the Portco CEOs. I said, if they're moving in next door to the office next door, that's something you may want to pay attention to. But system and challenges. I think, for me, what I have found is just this notion of transparency and change management, recognizing that this is their baby, and that honestly, we're out to. I mean, this is a joint venture in a lot of ways. I mean, everybody needs to succeed, and so I keep going back to change management. Not only change management at the top with the executive team, but it's change management throughout the organization. Because oftentimes these are businesses that have been in business, 30, 40, 50 years, and they've got a lot of employees who've been with them a long time. And it's really taking the time to communicate all the way down through the organization. And that's oftentimes not something that owner founders are accustomed to, but I think it makes all the difference in the world. So challenges, I'd say change management.
well, I've got the question teed up, Cindy. So we're not going to lose that question. But I got to just compliment you, Don, on bringing out this term change management, because not only are founders not really all that sophisticated or experienced in change management, but many of the 28-year-old financial analysts on the PE side have never run a business. So they can't spell change management. It's right, so that's a really, really big issue. And this whole transition in the sector or in the field where we're going from financial engineering over to valuing human capital. Another way of saying valuing human capital is valuing change management. And what is change management? It's understanding, bringing the whole person along in the journey to, as you said earlier, a sustainable transformation in the organization. So I don't think it could be said, kind of more importantly, how change management, is valued, and not to demean or to diminish the sponsor, who's on the sponsor side, because there are some great senior operating partners that do understand that, but each deal team is different. Sometimes they don't. Now, the question about how has private equity responded to the gap between, we're very collaborative. Well, the management team saying, well, you're not so collaborative. We have found that there's a bit of an echo chamber. And this is Aaron will bear me out on this year after year. There's a bit of an echo chamber on the private equity side. They tend to see themselves as better and more supportive managers, if you will, bosses, if you will, than their management teams see them. And in fact, I would take it a step further and say that I got to sit down and write this article at some point. But there's kind of the search for the magical CEO, or the search for the ideal CEO. The private equity investor oftentimes believes that if he or she finds that one person, that one person's going to transform that company. And I think we could all agree that individuals are capable of a lot of great things, but generally it takes a team. And again, this is where you got to look at the perceiver, right? The private equity investor may not be coming from a team environment. he or she may not have learned their craft in a team environment. They went to business school, they took their boards, et cetera, et cetera. So it's sometimes sometimes the clash or the gap between that score is very much influenced by the psychology and the emotional background, the social and emotional background of the individual. So chief operating officer, chief executive officer, chief revenue officer, chief financial officer, they're depending on each other constantly. Sponsor, deal guy, deal gal, not all the time. Not all the time.
Yeah. And Ted, if I can just chime in quickly,
Please.
You said something that I thought was really relevant, is that every deal is different, and every situation is different. And so I have seen a shift, frankly, from this 3 to 5 year period to a liquidity event to a more longer term view of 5 to 7 years. But everything is different. So I don't want to say that's what I see sort of as a trend. But so in terms of CEO, sometimes portfolio company or PE firms do bring in sort of a trained gun, if you will, to sort of change it more quickly. But typically, I think they want to get the right person in place for the sustainability. And I'll just add one more thing: is the biggest challenge I see around leadership is this: how do whenever a PE firm buys an asset and you've got an owner founder, they have tremendous industry knowledge, market knowledge, customer knowledge, which we absolutely cannot lose. But yet they've managed in a very small business kind of way oftentimes. And so how do you balance those two things to get that owner founder? You don't want to lose that knowledge base that they bring. Right. That's a good part of why we made the investment, right. To really taking that leadership and allowing it to go from a single digit to a double-digit EBITDA growth.
Well, and that's where your point about culture becomes so important, because the founder is the culture carrier by definition. Mm-hmm. And presumably he or she is going to exit fairly soon. They're not, occasionally they sign up for another 5-year run or longer, but that doesn't happen most of the time. Most of the time they've sold to private equity because they need an exit strategy. They're 55, 65, 75. I mean, it's time for them to move on. How do you keep the culture alive in that organization when you're also going to be making acquisitions or roll-ups or et cetera, et cetera?
That's such a great point, in the sense that I often coach the private equity, the operating partners around, how do I say this in a way? Let's make sure that we have an appropriate exit plan for that individual, that it's right. The right length of time, that we have the right knowledge transfer process in place, and that we've got a foundation of culture that's going to support the growth even after this person is left the organization.
Yeah. I talked earlier about rising interest rates, which we're all aware of, but there's a lot of hard data that is showing definitively that hold times are increasing. So as Don knows, many of you know, it was always kind of 3 to 5 years, and it was very opportunistic because the markets were very frothy. Now the hold time is, I think the average officially is like 6.5 years, and there are some investments that are longer than that. Just imagine what that does now to a private equity investment, where you've issued all the equity that you planned on issuing for the partners. Now you've got to come up with a new equity plan. You've got to be thinking about succession planning because people are getting older. And of course, the unemployment rate in the US has been kind of stubbornly pegged at 3.6, 3.7, 3.8, 3.9 for years. Right. And that's just jobs in general. That's not, the influence of AI and software engineering and digital. So there are tremendous headwinds, I think, that are facing private equity investments right now that really require both groups to really double down on talent.
Yeah. Hey, Ted, I've got a couple questions. One of the questions is, when you guys do the surveys, do you parse the data between the length of the relationship between the PE firm and the portfolio company?
The length of the relationship, like, I'm not sure that we've actually looked at that particular variable, Cindy.
Okay, all right. That was just one of the questions that we got. And then another question is, how do you move beyond change management to transition management? In other words, how do you support Portco employees dealing with the psychological journey or drama and trauma that is often an integral part of change management? Any suggestions on how they do that?
Well, I think Dawn would probably be the expert there. My quick answer would be another fascinating thing that we're seeing. I would love Dawn's opinion about this, but we're really seeing, and one of my dear friends is Johnny Taylor, the head of SHRM, and we talk about this all the time, that the HR function is really being elevated. It's being elevated around the world. And in private equity, it's being elevated. And so the value of a CHRO to a successful private equity investment cannot be underestimated. And that person, that man or woman, is not always there. And I think private equity is getting very savvy very quickly that they need to have that person there. And that has other implications on, do we have enough talent in the human resources field? What are we doing to accelerate the talent in the human resources field, et cetera, et cetera? Some great questions, from a professional development standpoint. But I think that's how you would address it. Your question, Cindy, which is, you need somebody, the CHRO, who's at the right hand of the CEO, who has the trust of that person's, whole trust, and then who's putting the kind of development, retention, services in place that our employees really deserve, and that haven't always been there in a private equity environment. Don?
Yeah, no, I guess I would agree. And, I read a lot of articles, and, once I get past all the AI articles and how great those are, that coming, we get to the human capital piece. And every article I read is about how whatever you want to call it, CHRO, the chief people officer, the chief people and culture officer, whatever it is playing a much larger role now in the organization, particularly in private equity, with this recognition of sustainability. And I will say that the other piece that I've seen, and I'm starting to see a pattern or a trend, is around this notion of employee ownership and private equity taking a stance that, we want to get everybody involved. We want everybody to have a piece of our success. And I've seen that take off. I won't name names in terms of Portco companies or PE firms, but I see more and more of that. So, hey, let them participate, let them see. And then the other thing I think is usually what happens is, it's this, it goes back to transparency and communication, and really getting the leadership team out in the ranks and talking about what we're trying to accomplish and why we're trying to accomplish it, and what it means not only for the business but for them as individuals. And oftentimes it means growth, it means development, it means success. Who doesn't want to go to the Christmas party and talk about what a great company they work for, or I'm part of this company that's doing this thing? That's just human nature. And the more we can do that, the more it becomes part of the culture. And this notion of transition versus change management, I think people get excited about where it can go, and frankly, start to really buy in because they've got ownership.
Well, I can't let that last comment go without a big applause, Don. Employee ownership has come to private equity, and there's a fellow, Pete Stavros, who I've known for years at KKR, who started a company that KKR owns called Ownership Works. He was on 60 Minutes the other day. Alix Partners our firm is a proud underwriter of Ownership Works. And this is all about spreading the wealth in private equity-backed companies. Instead of 6 executives at the top of the company owning all the equity, let's get equity down more into the ranks of the people that are really, really doing the work. And Blackstone came out 3 weeks ago with headlines that it was going to do the same thing. And so you know, on behalf of our country and society, I can think of nothing better than driving equity ownership into the hands of more people that are actually doing the work. So that's another trend that's directly impacting quality of life for people in private equity backed companies and really the society at large.
Hey, Ted, there's one other question. I don't think we've covered it exactly, but there's a question on how do you balance how much change and how fast the change should come?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, Don's been on the front line of this. We frequently will counsel our clients really to take the long view. And that sounds counterintuitive in a private equity environment. But given, you know, given that we live in a very, very different world, I mean, and I'm not just talking about COVID, but I'm talking about supply chain, I'm talking about climate change, I'm talking about, you know, wars around the world. Um, Individuals are change weary. So part of change management is knowing when not to do it, as well as when to do it. And so this is where I come back to this fundamental notion of, and I don't mean anything against 28-year-old MBAs, but this is where you have to, an investor, a board member has to take a broader look at what it takes to run a company. And I think, you know, we could come to the word empathy, that I think that private equity investors have to have more empathy for their management teams while they're holding the management team accountable for results and producing. I mean, just think about the headwinds I mentioned earlier, from interest rates to longer hold times to a very tough labor market. There's still a war for talent, and it's probably worse because of technology. It's probably more intense than it's ever been. And so then add all of the societal upheavals and the change, and you know what I'm sure what we're gonna be watching tonight on television at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central. So there's just so much going on that it's just extraordinarily important to pace the change. And so and the tendency is to go very, very fast in private equity. So we're actually slowing our clients down in most cases. Don, I don't know how you'd react.
Yeah, it's interesting because two things to add maybe there, Ted. One is the conversations I have with the CEO, the Portco CEOs, is things are going to change, right? You're gonna experience a pace probably unlike that you've ever experienced before. That's just the reality of it. Now, that said, it's also important that we recognize, you know, what too fast looks like. The other point I'll just make is meeting the organization where it's at. From a change, going back to change management, it's being able to recognize what they can absorb, how much they can absorb, and let's start small. For example, with one Portco company, you know, a fairly big Portco, but they'd never done succession planning. They'd never done talent reviews. So I had to take the executive team through what a 9-box looks like, right? And then so we started very simply, and we build and we build and we build, but not trying to put best practice in right away. But let's understand what the organization can absorb, where they're at, and let's build from there. Perfect.
Yeah. Let's go back to our data, and I'm also keeping an eye on the clock. This is a particularly good slide. So we found significant areas of misalignment between PE firms and portcos. Much of that misalignment involves leadership. So in response to the question, what are the top 3 areas of misalignment between PE investors and portco C-suites? PE investors said the number 1 is financial performance, 51%. 38% of portco CEOs, their number 2 area of misalignment was financial performance. So that's alignment on that, you know, on that topic, meaning that, you know, how come we're so misaligned in terms of what financial performance is about and achieving targets. That's why I said at the beginning of this talk, the big headline is it's really time to perform. Now, if we unpack that a bit, what do you attribute the poor performance to? PE says 52% of PE says unfocused execution. 15% of Portco management says unfocused execution. That's a wild difference. That can create a blaming environment, right? So that's extremely important to be aware of. Same thing, lack of urgency. Sponsors are saying, why isn't the ELT, why isn't the CEO's executive team, why don't they show more urgency? And nothing could be further than the truth for those same people. And the same for lack of flexibility or adaptability. So, this perception that it's the leader's fault, this perception from PE that it's the leader's fault, and the leader's feeling like, no, it's not our fault. It's not our fault. It could be that you're not very collaborative, or it could be that you've been you want yet another financial report this week when we gave you 3 last week. We got to do our day jobs. There are areas here that really need closer inspection. Don, any thoughts?
No, I would agree on this lack of execution or perception of lack of execution, or this misalignment of lack of, I'm a big believer in lean for lots of reasons, but around operational excellence, but also getting employee involvement. I mean, I think people sort of miss that part of it, and how big of an influence lean can be on the company culture, and getting those alignments all the way down to the front line around operational excellence and execution.
Yeah. How about the next slide? Let's see what we got teed up. So, most important talent and leadership challenges. At the bottom of the slide first, PE and PE saying talent recruitment and quality of leadership and succession planning. And there's pretty close agreement there between the two groups. I mean, I wouldn't say it's all about talent and recruiting, but it's a lot about that. Moving up, biggest challenges that PE firms face because of longer hold times. It's their growth and operating model. It's talent retention, no surprise there.
Mm-hmm.
It's building a strong leadership team. Keeping people engaged. I mean, these are things that were we to have done this survey 10 years ago, were we to do this survey 5 years ago, I don't think you would be seeing results like this. Human capital was fungible. People were fungible. It was more, have we taken the kind of cost out of the asset that we need to take out of the asset? What can we roll up into this asset? There wouldn't even be the language that we're using now in terms of engagement. I moderated a panel at PEI a few months ago, and one of our operating partners that were on the panel said, I said, how do you get your message about people across to your fellow deal team members, your fellow PE investors? And she said, I use data. I use employee engagement data. I use turnover data. I use the data that's coming out of the Fed. I use data that's coming out of the employment surveys. I let them know just how difficult it is to find and hold on to talent in this environment. And that's not even entering in longer hold times. So it's a largely a completely changed world that PE is dealing with now compared to even a few years ago.
I would agree. Absolutely.
What have your business transformation efforts lacked the most over the past year? So talent comes up again, and their PE sponsors and those folks running the companies are largely in lockstep with talent being important. There's the change management capabilities, the second column. right? And PE, almost leading the way that, let's get better at change itself. We have to change. Let's get more informed about change itself. A lot of agreement, strong leadership, too many priorities. You can see in that column, I'm sure Don can hear, the various CEOs he's worked with say, oh man, you're just throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, our way in terms of, working on things. And a clear vision and strategy is something I think PE says a lot over the years. Somehow they don't ever feel like they're getting enough, vision, clarity around vision and strategy. So that gives you a sense of, what you don't see here is you don't see difficulty with supply chain. You don't see, suppliers, you don't see trade war. You don't, some of the things that we've heard a lot, particularly through the COVID years, these are all, or mostly people related speed bumps or roadblocks for transformation.
So Ted, on that point, I've held this question. I think it's real appropriate now to talk about it from Rick Beyer. How do you distinguish the competencies that CFOs and other C-suite employees possessed prior to PE and that help them succeed then, and those they have to display in a PE environment? So how do you make sure that these competencies and skills that leadership and employees have prior to PE that they thought were strong, how do you make sure they succeed in a PE environment?
Well, I can always count on Rick to ask the most intelligent and the most difficult question.
That's right.
Thank you, Rick. That's a great one, and that's the basis of a lot of our coaching programs, quite frankly, because the competencies have changed. The competencies now are, again, I'm sorry if I sound a little bit like a broken record to use an analog analogy, but relating to people, inspiring people. We have, depending on who you read and what study you read, we have 4 or 5, some people say 6 generations in the workforce right now. And what boomers and Gen Xers need is very, very different than what Gen Z needs. And when they go on their phone and they look at Glassdoor and they see how the CEO is rated, that influence of social media cannot be overestimated. So leadership competencies have got to include emotional intelligence,
Yes,
communication writ large, being able to meet people where they are. And so for younger people, that means how do you connect their efforts with the mission of your organization? How do you show that your organization is doing good in the world that they're inheriting and that they care about? And by the way, they're going to vote with their feet. If they're not hearing it from their C-suite, or if they deem it to be lip service, they're going to go somewhere else, which is not necessarily the case with somebody in their 40s or 50s, to be sure. It might be, but it probably won't. They want different things. They want financial stability. They want to see the track record of performance of the company. So to your question, what are the competencies? The competencies are EQ. They're the ability to inspire a vision and to walk the talk. They're to be able to speak to career development and career progression in a meaningful way. So that's where the CHRO comes in, to kind of put your money where your mouth is, show that you have a professional development program and a development pathway for people who are 25, 30, 35 years old in the organization. Brings us to succession planning. Like, where am I going? Where am I going in this organization? Those are all competencies that in the old world of PE, we'd never even be concerned about. We wouldn't even be talking about. And that's how radically changed I think this sector has become. Don, how would you answer that question? Don?
Did we lose Don?
I think he was frozen or something. Anyway, Rick, does that make sense? Okay. Cindy, we've been at this for about 50 minutes. Do you want to spend a few more minutes?
Yeah, there's one, Laura Stanley. I think this is an interesting, she's been involved in these kind of change management things. And she's basically saying the employees had whiplash because every 90 days we were changing direction, or at a minimum changing the how. So I think what you're addressing, I mean, she's experienced, right, Laura? And so I think that's a validation of what you're saying, Ted. But Laura, if there's something else you want to add, feel free to come off mute and add that.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting that on the slide, that sort of clear vision and strategy was sort of the lower scoring point there. And it's interesting because, we were applying the Lencioni organizational health model. We were very clear about how we were communicating, and yet with the short-term expectations, frankly, of our investors, every 90 days it was a shift. And so how to, have a little bit more of the longer term view that you're describing, Ted. It's reassuring to hear that you believe that, and that, there are some organizations that adhere to that. And at the same time, it's tough for employees to manage the evolution, because every time you turn around, we're telling them a different story. And
Yeah, that there's an old phrase that we heard, years ago about people and profits. And I think that phrase some version of that phrase has arrived in private equity, where it's got to be people and profits. There's got to be the and there. This can't be just about profits. You're not going to get people to stay with you. You're not going to get the labor that you need. You're not going to get their hearts as well as their minds. And private equity is really waking up to this. Now, are they waking up to it, real fast and real well? I don't think so, but they are definitely waking up to it. And going back to employee ownership, that's a game changer. That's a game changer. When you're letting a forklift driver, create wealth for his or her family, that's really big. That's
well, in your article from last fall, Ted, in the Harvard Business Review, really resonated with a lot of people, from executive search firms to the PE organizations. Was thrilled to see that, and continue to recycle that and share that. Just yesterday was resharing it.
Great, thank you.
I think Don's back. Don, you were kind of gone for a minute.
Yeah, sorry, I froze for a second. I'm back.
I don't know where we lost you, but do you have any thoughts about the last few minutes?
Well, I think,
or if you want to tell us where you went.
You don't want to know. No, I agree. EQ becomes so important in this environment, and managing multi-generational. It's just a whole different perspective in terms of how to manage a workforce today than it was 5-10 years ago. And being attuned to that, I think, is so important. This notion of mentorship, and really what I've seen in other PE firms is taking mentors from other portco companies and assigning them to maybe some of the executives in the newer portco companies, to allow them to understand, so that, hey, here's what you're going to experience. You're probably, there's a lot of similarities, and just getting that connection oftentimes is a big help. And frankly, there are times where, it is a different leadership approach, and those folks recognize it and choose to not be part of it, which is totally okay as well. The last thing I'll say, Ted, and I'm sure you probably maybe see this as well, is in the last 5 years, what I've seen from a private equity standpoint is typically you would have someone on the team that was a human capital person. Most of the times their background was strictly executive search.
Yes.
And so they'd go out to the big executive search firms, whomever, and they'd recruit a partner in to find talent. What I'm seeing now is a much broader perspective. Yes, it's still about finding the right talent in the marketplace. But it's now also about all the things that you talked about. How do we create mentorship programs? What's a culture of inclusion look like? How do you manage a multi-generational workforce? Those kinds of things are really becoming much more prevalent. And to your point, maybe not as quickly as we'd like, but private equity is taking a broader perspective.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. So I think we're out of time.
Yeah, we're very close. We got 5 minutes. If there's no more questions, I will just ask you a question, Ted. For those who haven't read your article, is it okay if I send that
Oh,
Harvard?
of course. Of
Okay,
course.
with the
Yep.
slides and the recording, because
Sure.
it is an amazing, to Laura's point, that's an
Sure.
amazing article. So you guys, we love Ted. He's a thought leader for us at least once a year. He might be more often. He's amazing. I will copy both Ted and Dawn on the follow-up email if you want to ask them questions. Afterwards, you'll have their email so you can reach out to them. Okay? Everybody good?
Thank you all. Thank
Have a
you so
great-
much. Thank you,
Bye.
Dawn.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you
Thank you.
guys. Appreciate it. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Cindy.
John, how are you? I'm trying to get to I'm trying to stop the recording. What am I doing here? I can't stop it. Good to see you guys on. There. Now I can stop it. Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.